Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Two-Way Tonight. I'm Mark Halperin, in a bit of a playful mood because sometimes you have to laugh in order to keep from crying. Big story remains what's going on in Los Angeles. We have two great guests to talk about that today. Hogan Gidley, a regular here, former White House press secretary under Donald John Trump. And then for the first time on Two-Way, at least as far as I know, Professor Robert Pape, political scientist of the University of Chicago. If you're not familiar with his oeuvre, he's one of the country's leading experts on the concept of political violence and how violence in the streets relate and interacts with our politics. Brilliant and fascinating man. And as I said this morning on the morning meeting, in general, I usually don't like academics on my programs, and I don't like to see them quoted in newspapers because they don't know nothing about nothing in the real world. Sorry, that's how I feel about many, not all, but many academics. Not true of Professor Pape. He is a brilliant academic, but he also understands the real world, and that's why people look to him so often on these issues. And of course, no more opportune moment to have him on here to talk about his area of expertise, in which he is as expert as anyone in America, than tonight. So we'll talk about what's going on in Los Angeles and the back and forth there. President Trump talked up a blue streak today on two occasions. He did an event in the Oval Office on hurricanes, and he spoke down in Florida, North Carolina, Fort Bragg, and he had a lot to say there. And the Democratic Party continues to grapple with this situation. I was just talking right before we started here. It's why I'm not as prepared as I might be, because I got stuck on the phone with one of the smartest Republicans of the last 50 years. Might think that's hyperbolic, but I'm confident in saying this is one of the smartest and most experienced Republican strategists of the last 50 years. And he said, Mark, how could it be that the Democrats won't say whatever they want to say about the deporting of people here illegally who haven't committed crimes? He said, let them say America doesn't want to see 20 million people deported, and these people have come to the United States and they're contributing. He said, but why don't they say, but also it is never tolerable? And he said they should say this with Bill Clinton finger wagging, anger in their voice. Why don't they say it is never tolerable to engage in acts of violence against law enforcement officials or private property? It's never acceptable. And I denounce it, and my party denounce it. He's like, why don't they say it? Is there some constituency for attacking law enforcement or destroying private property? You know, he's like, what's the upside for them of not saying it? And I answered a version of what I've been saying on Two-Way since it started. Humana, humana, humana. I don't know. I don't really understand it, except Trump derangement syndrome and an unwillingness to acknowledge the incredible implications, real lives of real people implications of a Democratic president opening the border for 4 years or 3 years. In any event, I'm going to run through a little other news unrelated to LA. Then I'm going to bring our guests in and talk to them about LA, then show you a bunch of elements connected to LA. And then, of course, we welcome. No, I'd say we demand your participation. So if you want to get in on the conversation and you're here on the Two-Way platform, please raise your hand. Earlier today, I was talking to some senior officials at a very significant American company. That may sound like I'm bragging today. Just giving you a chronicle of my day. I was talking to some people at a company, and we were talking about whether the CEO of the company would come on Two-Way. And I said, now you might have trepidation exposing your boss, the CEO of this big company, to a bunch of ragamuffins and AKA members of the Two-Way community. And I said, this is the most respectful group of people I've ever dealt with. And they asked very smart questions, very respectful. I said, we had Laura Loomer on. It all went fine. People ask very respectful questions in a respectful manner, which is my way of saying, if you're watching on X or YouTube, don't put smack in the chat. And don't embarrass me by putting smack in the chat, because for all I know, the staff of the CEO is monitoring everything we do here to say, is this a safe place to go? And if he does come on, I'll expect everyone to be on their best behavior. In any event, my way of saying, raise your hand if you want to ask a question. You can be disrespectful to me and to Hogan, not to Professor Pape. He's a guest here tonight. I don't know if he watches the show, but let's make a good impression on him. All right, we're going to come back to LA, as I said. Lots of developments there. Let's see. Where's the thing I wanted to get to that doesn't relate to that? that relates it. Oh, number 14, Terry Moran, longtime correspondent for ABC News, who I worked closely with for a time. And as people can tell you, was famous for having a lot to say on the morning call, not the morning meeting we do here, but on the ABC morning meeting. Terry had a lot to say. Terry Moran has been fired by ABC News. Now, they're saying his contract was magically and mysteriously expiring this week or last week. But, you know, they didn't renew him, and he's been a stalwart correspondent there for years. And as you know, he's being let go because he tweeted a negative, personal, false attack on Stephen Miller and on the president. And ABC saying, you know, we can't have our journalists out doing these kinds of things. And then we see people like Chris Cillizza and Chuck Todd saying, well, this is outrageous to say that Terry Moran's conduct has anything to do as a window into the political leanings of other people at ABC News and in the dominant media. Well, I respectfully dissent from that point of view. Terry, maybe because it was late on a weekend night and he'd been drinking or something. I'm not saying he was. I'm just saying, can't imagine someone sober tweeting what he tweeted. But I guarantee you what Terry tweeted represents the point of view of a large majority of people in dominant media newsrooms. They hate Stephen Miller. And I don't say that with joy. I say it with sadness, because people in my business shouldn't be in the business of hating one side or the other, but they do. And it's why they covered up for Joe Biden, or tried to. It's why many people voted for Donald Trump, because they can see with their own eyes the level of bias. Terry shouldn't have tweeted that, but I'm glad he did, in the sense that it revealed the mindset, not just of Terry Moran, but of many, many other people who are in my profession and claim to be fair. I apologize for saying he was drinking. I don't know, one way or the other. But I don't apologize for saying I'm glad he tweeted it, because the more we can do to expose the reality of the dominant media's bias, the better it will be for America, the better it will be for the Democratic Party to come out of their blue cocoon, their blue bubble wrap, and the better it will be for my business, which should not be in the business of bias. All right, that's what I have to say about that. 15. This is an interesting story. Wall Street Journal exclusive, another exclusive for the Wall Street Journal. They're doing an incredible job. U.S. agencies tracked foreigners traveling to see Musk. Homeland Security and Justice Department kept tabs on foreign nationals visiting Musk properties in 22 and 23, reflecting concerns about his influence. We need to learn more about that. Interesting story, which will be widely read by people close to Musk, already has been. Next, 15B, Israel deports Greta Thunberg. President Trump talked about her yesterday, and Israel intercepted her, and on her intercepted vessel, they were trying to deliver food and medical supplies. 16, I get asked about this all the time. Is Andrew Cuomo going to be elected mayor of New York City, or is the socialist who's number 2 in the polls going to be our mayor? Today, Michael Bloomberg endorsed Andrew Cuomo. I don't know. If you were running for mayor in New York City in the Democratic primary, would you rather have Mike Bloomberg's endorsement or AOC's? I don't know. I mean, liberals would say AOC, but Mike Bloomberg was a pretty good mayor. My former boss, by the way, very good manager, and didn't always have the smoothest relationship with Andrew Cuomo. I was on record on this program and elsewhere saying Andrew Cuomo is a mortal lock, cannot lose this primary. It's now clear that he could. I don't think the chances are very good. We have ranked choice voting here. It's kind of confusing. There's going to be a big super PAC ad against the socialist candidate. But I will tell you this: if Andrew Cuomo somehow loses the primary, he is on the general election ballot, as is the current mayor, as will be a Republican. And I can tell you that I think Andrew Cuomo will win the Democratic nomination and be mayor. I can tell you there's a greater than zero chance that he'll lose the primary. And I can tell you that there's a high probability that if Andrew Cuomo is not the nominee, the people of New York will find a way to keep a socialist from being mayor. Quite confident. Haley's applauding because he's pretty anti-Israel. She doesn't want an anti-Israel mayor of Gotham City. But the guy has a lot of problems. He's so far left. I mean, again, I said Mayor Adams would be a worse mayor than Mayor de Blasio. I was right. I say, if you think de Blasio is far left, you ain't seen nothing yet. This guy makes Bill de Blasio look like John Bro. And if you don't know what that means, Google it. But I'm pretty confident that we will not have a socialist mayor, but we shall see. All right. That's some of the other news. Now, let's bring in our two guests. First, making his debut on the program with a big smile on his face, Professor Robert Pape. Professor, welcome in. Thank you for joining.
Thanks very much, Mark. Thanks for having me. And yes, I try to watch about once a week.
Okay.
This is my favorite audience here that watch.
All right. Well, very grateful for joining. Did you hear my very favorable introduction of you earlier?
Oh, yeah, it was terrific. I'd like to tell the audience it was all lies, but...
No, it's true. Do you know Hogan Gidley?
I don't.
No. Hogan Gidley, and I say this with affection and respect, believe it or not, was White House Deputy Press Secretary under Sarah Huckabee Sanders for President Trump. And now he is a top advisor for the Speaker of the House. If you look at almost any video of the Speaker of the House on a big day and you look behind him, you think you'd see Forrest Gump, but you'd actually see Hogan Gidley. He's everywhere.
Well, Hogan might want to know that in 2019, I briefed the Trump NSC on Afghanistan, Chris Miller and so forth. So there was a whole lot to say about that with respect to exactly how to negotiate with the Taliban. I'm one of the few people that thought that was a reasonably good idea when very few others did. And so you should just know, Hogan, that I've basically advised every White House since 9/11, and that includes Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah. So explain to people, including Hogan, why do presidents and presidential administrations, White Houses, why do they seek out the advice of an academic? What do you bring to the table that makes them
I bring original data and I bring original findings. I have no money to give to, I'm afraid, as an academic, I'm quite limited. I've had 3 kids, which means I'm even poorer than you might think. And so the bottom line is that for decades now, I have done important work. Even before 9/11, I was advising Chief of Staff of the Air Force. So I have found myself in my research, not just conducting research that sits on shelves, but conducting very important systematic research that addresses core issues that those senior decision makers cannot get at any other way. And I often find myself providing a neutral view. And also, Hogan, you'll probably appreciate this, I'm not job hunting. So I don't come in looking for a job, in which case I go home and they get to debate a lot of this. And then if they want to bring me back, they do. And I found that that's a pretty good lane to be in because I think that allows me to contribute as much as I can to the security of our country.
And Bob, when you talk about research and data, what kind of research do you do? What is it? Public opinion polling? Explain what it is.
Yes, exactly. In the 90s, I studied every air campaign in history, so I know a lot about when air power does and does not work, how to coerce governments and not. I've studied every suicide attack in history. I compiled the first complete database of all suicide attacks around the world. That produced really powerful findings. Our IC community really benefited from this. I helped stand up the National Counterterrorism Center with those findings and so forth. And then also most recently, I do national public opinion surveys on support for political violence among Americans. I've done this over the last 4+ years. We do quarterly surveys, just done one in May. Mark knows a little bit about this. And the fact is, this is one of the most robust tools, a canary in the coal mine, that we actually have. So am I surprised about what happened in LA? Well, I'm surprised it happened exactly in LA, but no, I'm not at all surprised about what happened. And that's because of this information that many have found quite helpful. And by the way, Hogan, if it turns out that I could be helpful to the Trump White House, I would be willing to do that.
All right. Appreciate that. Hogan, amongst the many reasons he's so good at his job, is he used to be a journalist. So he's inquisitive and repertorial. Hogan, any questions for Bob you want to ask about his work or anything?
Was 19 Robert O'Brien when you were there?
Actually, it was Chris Miller who was the guy I interacted with. He was the NSC point person for counterterrorism. Then he went on to be, of course, SecDef, acting SecDef. So he was the key person that I was dealing with. And I was dealing also with Pence's, key security person and so forth. So it was really the tight group that was about exactly how the negotiation should go with the Taliban, exactly what the issues are, what are the big risks if you don't do this that were not made public. I don't have classified information, so I can come in and talk about those things, and that's why that was turned out to be a very useful conversation. They're the ones who sought me out.
Okay.
All right, so let me set some stuff up, and then we'll talk to you guys about LA, and then bring folks in. So this is the seventh day when there have been or fifth day when there have been demonstrations. We expect some Marines to arrive later today. Moments ago, the New Washington Post headline, please, Sam. A federal judge issued a temporarily denied California's request to block the National Guard troops and Marines heading to Los Angeles from enforcing immigration and local law there. And that's, of course, the crux of a lot of this dispute. Gentlemen, I've been thinking a lot about a woman we had on the morning meeting today who said basically, and I'm paraphrasing her, of course, there's so much focus on the conflict and the personalities. Shouldn't we be talking about like these fundamental issues of, are we deporting 20 million people? What kind of due process do those 20 million people get? What's the proper role for the National Guard? And I listened to a lot of media today, and of course, there's just this obsessive focus on Trump versus the governor. Governor Newsom. And I got an email blast from Governor Newsom today, I don't know if it's a fundraising, but from his political committee, sort of updating on his battle with the president. And it really is just crazy, not surprising, unfortunately, how much the focus is on the personal. And Professor, you've been very outspoken and vocal, I should say, on saying these two guys have to work together. Explain the danger of political violence if they continue to be at odds. What's the cycle you're concerned about?
Well, there are dangers here for our country as a whole, and there's dangers for each party going forward. So for the country as a whole, we are going through the era I call the era of violent populism. For the last 5 years, we have seen historically high political violence on both the right and the left. And when I mean historically high, you have to go back to the 1960s to see anything like the violent protests we've seen on the left. We have to go back to the 1960s to see assassinations of figures on the left. Basically, what you are seeing is, and of course, we have the Trump assassination attempts. What we are seeing is a 50-year plus historically high period of political violence. It's a mistake to keep focusing on blaming the other side. And a lot of that is due to the fact that there is significant support for political violence inside the body politic. That is about 20% of Americans here, sometimes 25% actually do, Mark, support political violence. And that is really an unfortunate fact because it creates incentives for politicians to believe that they can run to that group. And this can happen on both sides, and I believe is happening on both sides. But there are big, big problems with this going forward. It means our next election in 2026 may be even more violent than we have had. Each of the 3 elections has been increasingly violent, and we don't want to settle these elections by assassinating our political leaders, but that is where we are heading. Also, it means we are corroding the body politic, where we are finding it more and more acceptable to have political violence in our country. And that is, of course, increasing the risks of actual violence. The risks of the two parties, for Democrats, the risk is that they are becoming the party of the lawless. And this is something that can't possibly be good as they try to reach out to the middle of America. The risk for Donald Trump and the Republicans is this will escalate in unexpected ways. And if you find yourself with the National Guard actually shooting citizens on the streets, this is not necessarily, to say the least, going to work in the president's advantage. So there are risks across the board. We're a tinderbox of a country, and it's terribly important that, as I said, both sides take the temperature down.
Hogan would love to know what your thoughts on what the professor said.
Well, I really want to know. I have a question actually for him.
Go ahead. Of course.
You're saying the numbers are high. 25% of the electorate believes violence is okay. To what do you attribute the number? Why is it so high?
There's really two factors here, Hogan. These are the broad systemic factors that are pulling our country apart. And so, yes, polarization's a problem. Yes, social media is a problem. But my work, I published a big piece, Hogan, in Foreign Affairs in the fall, a 5,000-word piece, if you want to get a fuller picture. The two big things pulling our country apart are, number one, we're going through a demographic shift from a white majority democracy to a white minority democracy. In 1970, we were 80% white, roughly, as a population. Today, we're 58% white. This is creating lots of ripple effects in our politics. It's creating people that are very nervous about what's going to happen when we reach that tipping point in the next few years. It's making immigration a lightning rod issue on both sides of the aisle. Those that want to stop that shift, those that want to continue that shift. But there's a second factor here, systemic factor, Hogan, that's going on, and that is we have shifted over 10% of the country's wealth in the last 40 years to the top 1%. And what that means is if you're in the top like 90% of the country, you're kind of flat. So it really didn't affect the top 10%, I mean, of the country. You're kind of flat. But if you're in the bottom 90%, you are been in a negative sum game. That means you have minorities who don't believe that they're getting as much benefit as they should. That means you have the non-minorities, whites, who are losing ground. And this is happening in many parts of our country, not just simply in the Rust Belt. And you put these two big systemic factors together. That is, you put the massive political change we're going through historically as a country to a white minority democracy on top of gross inequality. Man, you're just asking for trouble, and we got it.
But the numbers, so the demographic shift, I get the 10% of the top wage earners, the wealth gap kind of splits. I guess when you poll those or you got that information, those people in those categories who are concerned about a demographic shift and the wealth distribution, those were ones that said it was okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so for example, again, you can go to the Foreign Affairs piece, and your listeners can also go to the Foreign Affairs piece, and they'll see some of the data laid out here. So if you're worried about the Great Replacement, if you're worried that the Democratic Party is deliberately bringing in non-white voters to change the electorate, and Charlie Kirk was just talking about this, I think, yesterday or today, here, just very recently, then you are actually multiple times more likely to support violence in favor of the Trump agenda. However, if you believe in systemic racism, that the country has been systemically racist against non-whites, that is, racist against minorities, the opposite side of the coin, so to speak, you're also multiple times more likely to support violence. Now, to be clear, Hogan, they're supporting violence for different causes.
Right.
So it's not the case the right and the left are jointly, obviously, the case. But a simple way to talk about it is, are you supporting violence for or against the Trump agenda? That's been the big lightning rod, and it breaks down a lot with this demographic shift.
It's like it's like the polling in the last election that said threats to democracy were a really top issue and top 3 issue amongst so many voters, and that may be the case. Obviously, it should have been polling. The question was never asked, like the follow-up or the deeper dive is, what do you think is a threat to democracy? Because the number was so high, people on the right were thinking, well, the left is clearly a threat to democracy. The people on the left were saying that the right was a threat to democracy, but the media reported it as though just the Democrats were concerned because obviously they're the ones who are most threatened by this cultural shift, when in fact, I think Republicans felt the same thing should Democrats get back into power, that the democracy they loved was going to be erased.
That's right, Hogan. So our surveys are doing deeper dives on these issues than you would see in the Fox News poll or the Siena Times poll or the standard things on Real Clear Politics.
Right.
So we get the same numbers, the group that says Harris was a danger to democracy, Biden, and then also Trump. So we have those macro numbers. They are actually so vague, as you're saying, they're not
Right.
very dispositive. They don't tell you very much. That's why our work has been really focused like a laser light on political violence. It's not just one question among another 40 questions. We really are focusing on that like a laser light. So for example, last summer, I worked with Tom Dart, that's the sheriff of Cook County. We did special surveys and noticed that there was not that much of an escalation of violence around the DNC, which everybody was worried about. Well, then the news media doesn't want to cover why there wasn't. But the fact of the matter is we did very special surveys. We shared them with Tom Dart. They led to certain policies that I'm not, of course, a sheriff or into crowd control, but they did certain things, and voila, you had much less political violence than you otherwise might have. I did the same thing with our campus fears studies with university presidents, and we had much less violence in the University of Chicago campus than other places around the country. So doing these deep dives, Hogan, we're basically the specialists in the country who do that. There's not all these other people who do that. And this is why it's so important to do that. Because if you don't, then days like today, it's like, now we're just back to fighting politics as usual. It's the blame game. We're just going to blame each other. And that's what's happening 24/7. Well, maybe it's Mark Halperin. Okay, except for Mark Halperin.
Except for my several hours a day. Yeah. Speaking of the blame game, and I know the irony of what I'm about to do, I want to show you something that people are talking quite a bit about. I was looking to make sure I understood what was going on here. This is number 8. This is one of Hogan Gidley's, I think I can say without reservation, one of Hogan Gidley's top 400 members of Congress. This is Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, who spoke out today and said something that Dan Turrentine and other Democrats were not thrilled with. Number 8, Maxine Waters.
And even those who were out of step with what we are advocating, peaceful protest, did not create any violence. Nobody was shot, nobody was killed. Get it in your head. And so when martial law is called, what are you going to say? I missed the point. Don't miss the point, you all. Don't think that somehow, because they called out the National Guard, there was violence. There was no violence. I was on the street. I know. And I went from downtown detention back out into the community, talking to people what happened in Paramount, what happened in Compton, what happened in Inglewood. So, first of all, get it straight. And don't just rely on what you're being told or the few incidents that you saw.
So she's right in the sense that we've seen worse violence, but if you take her literal words, she seemed to be saying there was none, and obviously there was some. So, Professor, you first, then Hogan, what's the right way to cover that? Should we just ignore it?
Well, so first of all, we've done message testing, not with that particular clip, but with clips like that over the years. And this is exactly likely to provoke defiance by the other side. That is the Republicans. So this is why, Mark, when you show this, when people on Fox News will show this, they're going to get bigger audience. And everybody knows that. And our studies show exactly that. So this is not going to be helpful because it's so asymmetric. The big thing that's missing here, and that's been missing in LA for days on both sides, is time, manner, place rules to the protests. Right. So the number one thing that is allowing these clashes to occur and to occur over and over again, and you just see this just before I got on, I'm watching the CNN reporter who's terrified because she's standing right in the middle of a potential flashpoint that could go up while we're on the air. And the reason is because there are no clear rules for where the protesters should be to disentangle more strongly and cleanly these different sides. And that is something that when we did this with time, manner, place rules in universities, you had much better outcomes than those that did not. When you did this in the summer, last summer with the DNC, much better outcomes than you did not. This is how you can allow for there to be protests but you can create the rules that say, here are the actual red lines, not just, the head of ICE telling us over and over again, don't cross the red line. Nobody knows where the red lines are.
Right. Hogan, defy all expectations and just say, I probably presumption of grace to Congressman Waters, and she just misspoke. Go ahead.
I would if this wasn't a pattern with her. I mean, let's be honest, coming out many times in the Trump administration the first time around saying, calling for violence, get in the faces of those in the administration, tell them they're not welcome here anymore, tell them you don't want them here anymore, make a scene. As she said, repeat, but get right in their faces. This is another example of just, I don't know if it's just ignorance or just the willingness to lie to the American people or her constituencies. If someone burned a car in her driveway, I bet she'd say there was violence perpetrated against her, and I'm sure she'd give a lot of reasons for that. The rules that you mentioned that aren't in place, maybe they aren't. Maybe you know California law better. I'm sure you probably do, Professor. But if there aren't rules of where you can protest, that's a failing again at the local level of poor governance, poor leadership, et cetera. And so the desire of Maxine Waters and so many on the left right now, as I see it, to just turn their backs on criminals, criminal activity, and just to let it occur. It's like they get a pass because they're from another country, but then they also give a pass to those from America who commit violent crimes in California. So the rules, the whole state's Thunderdome. There are no rules. It's crazy.
So you're quite. I don't mean Hogan to. You're right to put blame on Democratic leaders in this situation because, after all, it's essentially their constituents that are involved in the violence. And it is. You're quite right to also say that destroying property is violent. And January 6th was almost all what I call non-lethal violence by the rioters on January 6th. And so that's what you're also seeing here. I have created a term for this. I call it non-lethal violence. And the reason is because the people are all over the place on this. So that's what you're seeing here in LA. And yes, but I would also say that it's incumbent upon the news media to actually talk about what would be a possible solution. And yes, it does mean certain leaders will have to adopt time, manner, place, but I'm not hearing in days. And look, I'm not watching it literally 24/7, but I'm probably watching it 12 out of 24. Yeah. I mean, I've been paying quite a bit of attention to this. It's my area. And I've not heard a single person on any channel talk about how we need better time, manner, place rules. They're doing the blame game. And this is, I guess, the way to draw audience, but it's not making anybody safer.
Yeah, it's definitely not making it safer. I'm not even sure it draws audience. It's just the reflex of the press. So, Hogan, I want to be supremely serious with you about this topic. I read all the time, President Trump did this on purpose, provoked this confrontation because of Elon Musk and reconciliation. I hear all the time the president is relishing this conflict. Is either of those true as far as you know, or are you, as far as you're concerned?
No. And this stuff happened when I was in the administration the first time around. He didn't relish in any of it. What he wanted was an end to it. Because as you've seen, not just domestically, but internationally, he wants to be seen as the peacemaker. But at the same time, he ran on and won on twice for president of the United States, law and order. And a lot of these people in a lot of these states are seeing it devolve into this violent hellscape, and they want someone to come in and try and settle things. And
okay, so let me stop you. Let's say you and I went in the Oval Office together. We brought Professor Pape with us.
Sure.
And you're standing next to me, and before we go in, I say, Hogan, I want you to back me up here. Like if I say something and the president's wavering, I want you to back me up. All right. So we're talking to imaginary Donald Trump. Mr. President, I get that you think Gavin Newsom and Mayor what's her name, Bass. Are incompetent, and I get your outrage at the attack on ICE officers, but calling him Newscum, calling out the guard without coordinating with him, this is inflaming the situation. So, Mr. President, why don't you call Governor Newsom and say, look, let's start things over. Let's coordinate on the response. Let's restore order to Southern California together, and then let's work through the normal process how these deportations are going to go. What would you say, Hogan, if the president looked at me like I was nuts?
Well, first of all, you wouldn't be in the Oval Office because your security clearances would prevent that from happening. You're too far of a security threat.
I'm one of three reporters. I'm one of three reporters with walk-in privileges.
Yes, sure. I know. We know who they are, actually.
Yeah.
I think a large portion of what you said is correct. And I think Donald Trump is good at having those. I mean,
but he's got to stop calling him Newscomb.
Okay, that's your big complaint.
No, it's not my big complaint, but it doesn't contribute to a comedy, to a chord, which the professor, I believe, is absolutely right in saying, like, stop calling him names, stop failing to coordinate.
Literally said he was a nice guy.
But he's inflaming the situation. If he wants to be president of all the people and he wants to carry out these deportations, which he said he would do, why doesn't he de-escalate it?
Okay, but let me answer your question with a question. Why don't Bass and Newsom say thanks? We couldn't get a handle on our city. We've let it burn to the ground.
100%.
We've let millions of people come in and drain resources.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And they should say, and we should have denounced the violence, attacks on federal law enforcement. Well, I agree with you. But my hypothetical, we were only visiting the Oval. Then we get in a time machine and we go 3,000 miles away. Now we'll address the governor and the mayor. But if the professor is right, and I think anyone with half a brain, and he's got more than that, would agree, this should be de-escalated. There's a tinderbox. And
yes, but Newscomb is not the escalation. Calling him Newscomb is not the escalation.
Doesn't help. It doesn't help.
No one.
It's disrespectful. Yeah, go ahead,
for
Professor.
what it's worth, as somebody who's never personally met Donald Trump, but has watched just about every one of his rallies here, and I've been to his rallies, Hogan. I'm one of these professors that actually likes to go to the field and see what it's like. I've been to Harris rallies as well. I think Donald Trump is one of the most brilliant communicators we have on the planet. And I think that is really quite something. And I believe that if he were to see a reason to adjust, he could adjust on a dime and do it far better than any of us could even imagine.
Yeah, but
I think the bigger thing here is explaining, I would argue, to Donald Trump, number one, what is the real risk here that he's facing and the country is facing? And the problem, as I said again, is you won't need much with the way these groups are now intermingled. You only need a small number, even one bad actor that wants to kill 20, 30 people here that can then start off a melee where you're going to have the actual police or National Guard shooting at people. Yep. This is not a situation which then is going to necessarily work to anybody's advantage. This is way too dangerous. And I think number two, the time, manner, place issue, which is that he can, I think, as president of the United States, say, I've been elected to do these deportations. Yes, we're a democracy where protest is allowed, but there needs to be time, manner, place. And if Donald Trump would put that on a post, I believe a lot of people could get behind that, possibly even some Democrats. Yeah. And I'll say one more thing. I was arguing about the problems of the Iraq War, which Trump agrees with, back in 2002. And there was one Democrat who was really arguing that. And you know who that was? This little state senator? His name was Barack Obama. And I argued then, in the fall of 2002, that's the position that could become president. I never met the guy. But I'm telling you that this is what's really possible for the Democrats. The Democrat who stands up for law and order in this situation may end up having far more support than he or she may recognize.
And if you say it right, you have no problem with the base. Hogan, I'm going to say one more thing, then we're going to go to your question. So please raise your hand if you want in on the conversation. Newsom and the president have talked in the last couple of days on the phone. And we know the president does, as he said publicly, he does have a certain variety of respect for Gavin Newsom because Gavin Newsom speaks his language. Donald Trump likes savvy politicians. He likes people who get the joke. And the detractors on his platform who don't understand Gavin Newsom, just like the detractors don't understand Donald Trump, Gavin Newsom is a very smart, very savvy guy. So they have some comedy and some connection. And I think what makes me cynical about it, and I'm the least cynical person you know, is it does feed the perception, at least to me, that this is all for show, because they're talking on the phone. Don't hang up the phone till you solve it. Have time, place, circumstance. Have the coordination of the National Guard. Have a plan to protect the ICE officials, and have a conversation about how are these deportations going to go? Democratic officials, the mayor, members of Congress from Southern California, they say, stop deporting people. Well, he's not going to. He won because he said he's going to deport people. He's not going to deport all 20 million. Excuse me. Huh.
Bless you.
Excuse me. But he is gonna deport more people. So let's have that conversation because the position of the Democrats seem to be, if you go to a Target or a Home Depot or whatever it is, and you find some bad hombres, and in that raid, you get some, or not raid, in that roundup, you get some people who are here illegally but aren't violent criminals, they're going to deport some of them. Let's have that conversation, because the president's not breaking the law. It may not be the public policy that some Democratic members of Congress would pursue, but have the conversation. Stop posturing in public and creating what the professor correctly points out. It's just a volatile situation that could lead up to a bad place. All right, time for questions. And of course, we're going to start as we traditionally do whenever she raises her hand, attached to her wise body and brain. Lindsay, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are in the South and Hogan Gidley's native Mason-Dixon
I know I haven't joined with Hogan yet.
Yeah, well, welcome in.
South Carolinian.
Hogan, she's your fellow South Carolinian.
Nice.
Where are you
Just
from
like
in
the
South Carolina,
Catholics,
Lindsay?
Dallas. I'm in Charleston.
There you go. Hogan loves Charleston.
Can't beat that.
He recommends the barbecue. Lindsay, what's on your mind?
So I think for once I finally have kind of a quick question. And it might be a very dumb question, to be honest, but when the professor says things like, sorry, I was driving back from the airport, so I didn't hear names or whatnot, but when the professor says something to the degree of, violence on both sides, which I agree, how do you attribute who's doing the violence? There's one day in particular that I feel like a lot of the participants were thought of to be on one side, and I would think that there's a group of them, at least, that made a lot of ruckus on that day that is not.
So Lindsay, that's a great question. And I have large research teams at the University of Chicago, and we work 4 quarters a year. That doesn't allow us to identify sort of the political identity of every single attacker and every single attack, but we can learn quite a bit. So for example, on January 6th, the roughly 1,600 people that were prosecuted for storming the Capitol, we have studied each and every one of those people in detail, and you would see big fat analysis of their demographics, not just simply cursory stuff. We're basically the primary repository of that. Even the FBI uses our work. And so what we're able to do is we're able to really see inside how many are vocal supporters of Donald Trump, how many were vocal supporters of left-wing groups. And the answer is that it's either all support for Trump or just nothing. There's nobody we actually have in our database and we've really looked pretty hard on this. Now, also then on the campus unrest. So as you know, there has been all the storming of different Jewish buildings. Well, I conducted, with the support of Stanford University, the University of Chicago, Colby College, a group around Northwestern, the only, to this day, 5,000 student study. These are current undergrads. This was 4 months after October 7th, where we asked them their support for what happened, the protests, the pro-Palestinian protests, the violence against the Jews on campus, and it is overwhelmingly Democrat. So when I say the violence is on both sides, I'm not speaking with hand-wavy knowledge or reading somebody's op-eds or something or other. Here we have really, and if you go to our University of Chicago project on security and threats, you will probably be inundated with these big fat reports, Lindsay. And our big problem, just to put in a plug for the center, is we don't have the money to have a PR team. So we have these big fat academic reports, okay? And we're not a Washington style think tank that's funded out the gazoo. We're basically doing the hardcore research, and you'll find that now that doesn't mean we can cover. So was Crooks, by the way, the guy who tried to kill Trump, was he a Republican or a Democrat? Well, we're following this very, very closely, but the video just put out by the New York Times yesterday here, this is not this positive in any way whatsoever. So I can't tell you we can say every single case, but you would just be amazed at how far we can take this and really show you that it's happening on both sides.
Yeah, Hogan.
Yeah, I mean, look, if the Lindsay, the crux of your question is what? That you feel as though there are specific groups on both sides that are problematic? Or are you saying one tends to stick out more in your mind?
Well, I think both, but my question was really more of like identifying when you talk about percentages were left, percentages were right, Democrat, Republican, whatnot. Well, when I see people changing into MAGA gear and then going into riot somewhere, I don't think
You're
that those are
exactly right.
MAGA
So,
people.
Lindsay, you can go to, for example, we searched the social media of every single person again as they're being arrested. And yes, people try to take it down, but that was not true in the first few months. So we were able to go back and actually do our own analyses here. And I can't tell you it's 100% perfect, but I can tell you that gave testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Chuck Grassley was interested in this. So was Ted Cruz. I'm not telling you they're publicly supporting anything. I'm just telling you that this is the level of engagement here with this information. And this is the way I did. This is similar to what I did with suicide terrorism or with my study of the bombing campaigns that the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I mean, who would think the Chief of Staff of the Air Force would find some academic civilian study interesting, but nonetheless, my book remains required reading for the U.S. Air Force.
Amber, thank you. Lindsay, thank you. Sorry, Lindsay, thank you. I'm reading
Thank
ahead.
you.
Lindsay, thank you. Grateful to you. All right, ladies, bringing you in together just for the sake of economy. Amber and Ann, welcome to you both. Just as you unmute, tell folks where you are, what's on your mind. Amber, you first, and then Ann.
I'm in Indianapolis area. I had a question about kind of related to the guy Dan who was on last night, and I think he was on the Community earlier today.
Yes, ma'am.
And kind of tying into what the lady you were referring to this morning was talking about. How do we just actually know what's even going on? Because obviously I'm in Indianapolis, and I know several I was on Instagram and X that lean pretty conservative. And then obviously, you see everything on the dominant media that is sugarcoating, I would say, what's happening. So between, claiming that one side is only focusing on violence and on cars being set on fire, and the other side saying this is mostly peaceful, how are any of us in the rest of the country supposed to know what's actually going on?
Amber, it's a fantastic question. We're going to address it in one moment. And ask your question as well, if you would actually tell folks where you are.
Sure. Yeah, I'm in the Sacramento Valley, north of Sacramento in California, fourth generation. Yeah, can somebody address, do people actually get paid to do the protesting? I hear people say that, and I go, well, how do you know this?
Yeah, and all right. So you both are asking a version of the same great question, which is, if you want to be an informed citizen, how do you know? Definitely watching dominant media. Thank you both. Stay with us. Definitely watching dominant media is not going to tell you, and watching conservative media is not going to tell you either. And obviously social media, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's not verified. I'll say this. First of all, if you really want to understand it, get yourself a map of the area. Okay, understand the lay of the land, the physical. So where is the detention center? What's around it? Okay, if you have that sense of the geography, you've got a better sense to put stuff in context. So that's one thing to do. Another thing to do is don't believe anything on social media. Nothing. No, doesn't matter who posted it. It might be true. I'm not saying it's false, but don't reflexively believe it. And then focus on things that are factual, that you can see with your own eyes, or come from a credible source. Government officials are sometimes very credible sources, and sometimes they're not. But the challenge you both are expressing as a professional journalist, I feel it too. And I'm very a lot of humility about the question you asked. People will tell you they're all paid, or a lot of them are paid, and there are people who say, well, of course they're not paid. If I'm going to have a position on that, I'm going to fly out there and I'm going to get on the ground. I'm going to talk to people myself. I don't believe a soul unless I do it myself. Hogan, let me ask you, you answer however you want, but let me ask this way. How does the president know? because the president's getting a lot of his information from reading the newspaper and watching cable news. Does the president have people on the ground who are giving him better facts than Amber can get in Indiana?
Oh, yes, of course.
Where's he getting
Well,
his information?
He's got teams of people around him studying these things on a daily basis, like our good professor here, but in their issue areas that come to him with information, documentation from the ground level. I will tell you, though, from a broader standpoint, Amber, it's so sad that you have to even ask that question. That shows you the state of where our media is right now, that you have no idea where to actually get good, honest, decent, unbiased information on a topic. And I'll tell you, my mom will call me all the time because I do some work, as Mark said, up at the House with Speaker Johnson. And we'll say something she heard about a bill on the news and she knows this is terrible. And I'll be like, that's not true at all. I'm actually in the room. I'll tell you what happened. But I'm in the room. She pays attention to news. She watches it. She reads it and still doesn't know. In fact, I was on a phone call with a prominent media figure who shall remain nameless, who said to me after the big, beautiful bill passed, they were aware of rescissions, extra cuts that came from the White House. We were going to vote on those. And that person understood the process. Once we voted on the rescissions, we just put them into the bill, the big, beautiful bill in the Senate. That is not how that goes. And this person has a dominant television program, and even they didn't know the process. So what I'm saying is, as Mark gave you an idea, and that was good, the time, manner, and place, as the professor said, he gave you the place with the map and the other things, which are good. It's just sad you have to ask, because so few people out there have any credibility whatsoever, because they've spent it all, they've burned it all, telling you bad facts, bad information, lying, bias in all the ways. It's just sad.
Professor, this comes up not just in protests, but in wars and all sorts of fog of circumstances. How does an academic get to the bottom of, are some of these people being paid?
Well, so first of all, how does an academic get the bottom up? So I went during Portland. So for example, the blow up in Portland in the summer of 2020. Well, one of the things I did, not in the middle of the actual melee, but I actually went to Portland and I saw for myself what a big problem was, which is right next to the Multnomah Federal Building was a giant park. And what happened is the local authorities allowed the protesters to organize in that giant park that's literally a staging ground feet away from the actual security, the police. There's no doubt you're going to get a blow up when that happens, and then you're going to get the tear gas when that happens. Again, no time, manner, place. You're asking for trouble. It's obvious in that way. So I think this is really one of the big, so also back to the Trump rally. I went to the Trump rally October 4th or 5th. There was the return to Butler, the one with Elon Musk and so forth. I was physically there. So what I saw was almost no reporters I recognized from television, by the way. None of the reporters you see on any of the TV programs were actually there. What I saw was up close and personal myself, people willing to fall over after standing in line for 10, not in line, in place for 10 solid hours, barely moving to wait to listen to Donald Trump. And I was one of those people because I wanted to see what this was really like. This was enormously eye-opening, and I just wish that we had had even half the reporters in the country physically there to see it, because this is what would tell you these people were going to walk on coals for Trump. This was not some Republican talking point. This was the real thing, and you had to see it for yourself to believe it, because I wouldn't have believed it had I not seen it.
Yeah, and the answer to your question is we don't know. I tend to doubt it, but we don't know. And the only way you could know is to go approach those people and try to figure out who they are and ask them a lot of questions. When I see the picture of the guy with the Mexican flag, my attitude is maybe that's Photoshopped. Now, I've seen video of many of them. I've seen interviews with some of them. So probably happened, but you just got to be skeptical of it all. Anne, how did you learn about two-way?
It just popped up on my YouTube thingy. I told you when I first came on how disheartened I was about the fighting and lost a friend over voting for Trump.
Well, I watched two-way for this reason.
Yeah, Amber.
So I love it.
Yeah, Amber, what do you like about two-way?
I like that it just feels honest, I guess, and I really like the community and how thoughtful and intelligent everybody is, and how broad the audience is. From like I see very recognizable names sometimes in the chat here that not necessarily talking, but that are attending the Zooms, and I just think that's the coolest thing, that I can be in here.
Appreciate that. There are actually some very big people here who use
most famous political.
There's some people here who use pseudonyms that if you knew who they were, you'd be even more delighted, perhaps. Amber, thank you. And thank you. Very grateful to you both. Professor, grateful to you for making time. Loved having you on. Hope you'll come back.
Absolutely. It's a great pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Thank you. And Hogan, thanks to you, as always, for being on.
Hogan Gidley's not a pseudonym.
It's not a pseudonym, but he is a top advisor to the Speaker of the House of the United States of America, who's working miracles on reconciliation. Hogan, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right. A couple things I want to tell you about. Again, if you haven't listened to my new episode of Next Up, you can watch it on YouTube or listen to it as a podcast. Batya and Dan are on, and I've got a couple of monologues, reported monologues, we call them. One is on Democrats' inability to deal with Donald Trump on immigration. Just a decade now of sample space to show us that when Donald Trump talks about immigration, Democrats just don't seem to be able to deal with it. And then the question of whether the Democrats can organize themselves to win the presidential race by closing the technology gap and the voter registration gap and the voter turnout gap that was on vivid display in 2024. And that if you look at history, probably is going to require the Democratic National Committee to step up and lay the groundwork for whoever the Democrats nominate for president. Lastly, I want to talk to you about two-way. I'm very grateful to have this audience and this community. And as you know, our programs, a number of programs have grown. Meghan McCain, Michael Moynihan, Bridget Fedesi, and Ethan Strauss all have programs on two-way now, and more are coming. And some of you have sampled those shows, but some of you have not. And I'd urge you to sample them. If you haven't watched, these are four. I'm really, I almost will cry when I think about it. These are four of the most talented people in America who are journalists, commentators, thinkers, communicators. They're great. And then, of course, there's the entire cast, Dan and Batya and their three colleagues, Nina and Robbie and Emma Jo. These are incredible people. And the shows are on. You can go to twoway.tv and see the schedule. But I'm asking each of you to please sample at least one of the shows that you haven't seen yet. Just sample them because they're all great. And this platform depends on growing as a business. And a big part of that is the program. So if you like Two Way, if you like my two programs that I'm on, and I've got a new show that's premiering in a couple of weeks, we'll tell you about it, a third show. If you like my shows that I'm on and Dan and Sean, please sample some of the other shows. I ask you to do it because they're great and we want you to do that. So go to twoway.tv to see the schedule. You can also subscribe to my Substack. Coming up at 7 o'clock, Michael Moynihan. Again, one of the most talented people I've ever met. I'm just so honored that he's part of Two-Way. Michael Moynihan, the Moynihan Report, is on at 7 Eastern Time. Michael's guest, Brace Belden, co-host of TrueAnon. That'll stream live on YouTube, on Michael's channel. And, of course, you can watch it on demand. And, of course, you can also be part of the conversation. Go to twoway.tv to sign up in just moments, 2 minutes, to be part of it. I will be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time with Sean and Dan for the morning meeting. And I'm not going to tell you who's on next up on Thursday, but I will probably tomorrow, and you won't want to miss it. Two great guests and some other monologue that I'll be writing on the treadmill in just a few minutes. Couldn't be happier to have you all here, Professor, for the first time here, and Hogan. And please, right now, go sign up to be on Michael Moynihan's show. Going to end a minute early to give you time. Switch over to the YouTube channel there if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're watching here on the Two-Way platform, go sign up, register, and join Michael on the Moynihan Report. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of the Two-Way community. And I'll see you at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Have a good evening.